Latvian. He was educated. He had sworn an oath to protect the people. And in the summer of 1941, Viktors Arājs chose to become something history will never forgive. The man who turned his own country into a graveyard. Over 70,000 men, women, and children were erased from Latvia's soil under his direct command. Not in years, not in months, in weeks, block by block, name by name, pit by pit. The most chilling part? He nearly got away with it. He lived quietly in Frankfurt for decades, working at a print shop, going to the market, blending into normal life, while the families of his victims tried to rebuild from nothing. This is the story of one of the Third Reich's most ruthless local executioners. And if you've never heard his name before, that is exactly the problem. If history like this matters to you, the kind the textbooks skip, then subscribe to War Heroes right now and hit that bell. Every week we dig into the men and moments that shaped the darkest chapters of the 20th century. Don't let these stories disappear. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Let's go. To understand Viktors Arājs, you have to understand the moment that made him. July 1st, 1941. Riga, the capital of Latvia. A city of grand architecture, crowded markets, and nearly a century of Jewish community life had just changed hands overnight. The Soviet Red Army retreated eastward, leaving behind confusion, fear, and a power vacuum the size of a country. Within hours, German Wehrmacht troops rolled through the streets. Swastika flags were mounted on government buildings before the smoke had even cleared. Citizens stood on sidewalks watching, unsure whether to cheer or run. Before the war, approximately 95,000 Jews called Latvia home, roughly 5% of the entire population. They were doctors, teachers, lawyers, musicians, merchants. Families who had lived along the Baltic coast for generations. Within a single year, more than 70,000 of them would be dead. That catastrophe had a face, and that face belonged to Viktors Arājs. Born on January 13, 1910, in Baldon, a small town then part of the Russian Empire, Viktors Arājs grew up in circumstances that would have broken most people. His father, a blacksmith, was conscripted into World War I in 1914 and never came home. His mother, of Baltic German descent, raised 2 children alone in grinding poverty. That early void, the absent father, the unstable world, left behind something dangerous, an obsessive craving for status, control, and belonging. As a young man, Arājs enrolled in the Faculty of Economics and Law at the University of Latvia in Riga in 1932. He joined the elite student fraternity Latonia, a brotherhood with deep, far-right nationalist roots. These were men who believed Latvia's problems had a target, and they were ready to act on it. When the economy deteriorated, Arājs dropped out and joined the Riga police force. He married Zelma Zavot, the daughter of a wealthy shop owner, a surname he would later steal to hide his identity in post-war Germany. In October 1938, he resigned from the police, restless and ambitious, waiting for the moment the world would give him real power. That moment arrived in the summer of 1941. Shortly after the Red Army withdrew from Riga, Arājs walked into an abandoned police station at 19 Valdemara Street and made himself at home. It was there that he reconnected with Hans Dressler, a Latvian interpreter attached to SS Einsatzgruppe A, commanded by Franz Walter Stahlecker. Dressler knew Arājs from their school days. He introduced him to Stahlecker. The SS commander, who needed local muscle for operations he wanted to look spontaneous, took one look at Arājs and saw exactly what he needed. Stahlecker gave Arājs a simple order. Form a unit. Deal with the Jewish question. Within days, the Arājs Kommando was born. It started with roughly 300 men, not professional soldiers, but university students, ex-policemen, and radical civilians hungry for authority. Within weeks, that number swelled to 1,500 volunteers. Arrayed men who didn't ask questions, men who wanted to act. What followed was not war. It was a systematic, organized campaign of murder. 3 days into German occupation, on the morning of July 4, 1941, Riga woke up to something it had never seen before. Arājs Kommando surrounded an entire neighborhood. Soldiers moved door to door, dragging Jewish residents from their homes. mostly women, children, and elderly men who had nowhere to run. They were herded to the Great Choral Synagogue on Gogula Street, one of the most sacred buildings in the Latvian Jewish community, a house of prayer that had stood for nearly half a century. The doors were chained shut from the outside. Gasoline was poured along the base of the building. Hand grenades were thrown through the windows. The building exploded into flame. Those inside screamed. Some tried to force open windows. They were shot where they stood. A Latvian witness who testified in court decades later recalled being forced to watch. Anyone who looked away was beaten. German officers stood outside filming the scene. Footage later used in official Nazi propaganda reels. Arāj's men were laughing. That same evening, his deputy, former celebrated aviator Herberts Kukurs, oversaw the burning of the Stabu Street synagogue. By the end of 2 days, at least 3 Riga synagogues had been destroyed, and nearly 400 Jews were dead. In a confidential report sent to Berlin, SS Commander Stahlecker wrote, "The uprising of the Latvian population against the Jews has been successfully organized. We merely provided technical assistance." Technical assistance. That was his phrase for mass murder. After the synagogue burnings, the Arājs Kommando didn't slow down. They scaled up. Public city buses, the same green transit vehicles once used to carry factory workers and school children across Riga, were repainted and fitted with locked rear doors. Their new route had only one stop: Biķernieki Forest, 6 kilometers northeast of the city center. At Arāj's headquarters, weekly lists were drawn up. Jews from the Riga ghetto, political suspects, intellectuals, anyone denounced by a neighbor. Groups of 30 to 50 people were loaded into the buses, doors bolted shut, armed guards positioned on the roof. Biķernieki had once been a popular recreation area: walking trails, small ponds, families on Sunday picnics. By the summer of 1941, it had become an industrial-scale killing ground. Victims were forced off the buses and marched to pre-dug pits. Shooters worked in hourly shifts. Some drank to steady their hands. Reports were filed after each session, listing the number of people processed and the ammunition used. By the end of summer 1941, Biķernieki Forest alone held the bodies of approximately 4,000 Jews and 1,000 alleged communists. Today, small stones stand where those pits were dug. Each stone bears a name. Most visitors walk through in silence. November 30th, 1941. Before dawn, temperature below freezing. Whistles and shouting tore through the Riga ghetto, where over 30,000 Latvian Jews had been confined for months under conditions of deliberate starvation and disease. The order had come from SS Police Commander Friedrich Jeckeln. The entire ghetto was to be emptied in a single day. The execution site was Rumbula Forest, 11 kilometers southeast of Riga's city center. And the Arājs Kommando flanked the marching columns on both sides. Men, women, children, the elderly, through 11 kilometers of freezing road. Those who fell were shot on the spot. Those who couldn't keep up were shot. Those who cried too loudly were shot. At Rumbula, 3 massive pits had already been dug, each roughly 10 to 15 meters long and over 2 meters deep. What happened next was not chaos. It was an assembly line. Groups of 10 to 20 people were stripped of their belongings and forced to lie face down in the pits, on top of those already dead. They were shot in the back of the head with Walther pistols. A new group was brought in. The process repeated for 12 consecutive hours. By nightfall, more than 13,000 people had been executed in a single day. 8 days later, on December 8, 1941, the operation resumed. This time, the Jews remaining in Riga were joined by Jewish prisoners transported from Berlin, Frankfurt, and Hamburg. Men and women from Germany who had been told they were being resettled in the East. When they arrived and saw the piles of clothing, they understood. Another 12,000 were shot. In 2 days, 25,000 human beings erased. One of the largest single massacres in the entire Baltic theater of World War II, second only to Babi Yar in Kiev. A survivor named Frida Mikkelsen, who lived by lying motionless beneath the bodies of others until nightfall, later wrote in her memoir, "She felt the warmth leaving the bodies around her. She held her breath. She did not move for hours. When darkness finally came, she crawled out of the pit and looked up at the sky over Riga. Black, not with clouds, but with smoke. By early 1942, Latvia had been officially declared Judenrein, cleansed of Jews in Nazi terminology. Arājs and his commando were redeployed eastward into Belarus, attached to German forces conducting so-called anti-partisan sweeps through villages in the Vitebsk, Mogilev, and Polotsk regions. In reality, these were extermination campaigns targeting civilians suspected of aiding resistance fighters, farmers, women, and children included. A March 1943 SS report to Berlin praised the Latvian auxiliary units as particularly efficient in carrying out the tasks of cleansing the area of hostile elements. For this efficiency, Arājs was promoted to SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to lieutenant colonel. By the end of 1943, as the Soviet Red Army began its counteroffensive, entire regions of Belarus had been burned to empty fields. Of Latvia's pre-war Jewish population of approximately 95,000, over 70,000 had been killed, one of the highest proportional destruction rates of any Jewish community in all of occupied Europe. In 1944, as Soviet forces advanced, the Arājs Kommando was disbanded. Most of its members were absorbed into Waffen-SS units. Arājs himself retreated west. He was captured briefly by British forces screening SS prisoners after the war, but released in 1949 due to insufficient direct evidence at the time. He then vanished into West Germany under a stolen identity, Viktors Arājs, his ex-wife's maiden name. For over 2 decades, he worked at a printing shop in Frankfurt, lived quietly and waited for the world to forget. It almost did. But in Hamburg, a group of young prosecutors reopened the Einsatzgruppe A case files, and where deep in the Bundesarchiv, they found a personnel record for an SS officer named Viktors Arājs. They matched it to the man in Frankfurt. Survivors in Latvia and Israel came forward, including Zelma Shepchalowitz, who testified to witnessing Arājs personally oversee executions, beatings, and humiliations. On December 21, 1979, 38 years after the massacres, the Hamburg court delivered its verdict. No order, no obedience can justify crimes against humanity. Viktors Arājs was sentenced to life imprisonment. He served 9 years in Cella prison. He never confessed, never asked for mercy, never showed a single moment of remorse. On January 13, 1988, his 78th birthday, Arājs died of a heart attack during a supervised outing outside prison walls. The prison record noted simply, deceased, natural causes, no ceremony, no visitors, no eulogy. Today in Rumbula Forest, where 25,000 people were killed in 48 hours, the trees have grown back tall and quiet. Moss covers the ground where the pits once were. Every winter, Latvians, Germans, and Israelis come to that forest. They place small candles on the stones in freezing air and stand in silence because words after a certain point simply are not enough. Viktors Arājs was not born a monster. He was a man who made choices again and again and again, to answer ambition with cruelty and to follow orders that his conscience, if he ever had one, should have refused. The Third Reich's history is not only the story of Hitler, Himmler, or Heydrich in Berlin. It is the story of the men like Arājs who chose to act. Educated men, local men, men with neighbors and families and surnames, who looked at their own communities and decided to destroy them. That choice is the warning history keeps giving us. The question it asks is not comfortable. If you had been living in Riga in 1941, when evil wore the uniform of law and order, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story moved you, subscribe to War Heroes, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and never let names like Viktors Arājs fade into forgetting. Because the moment we stop remembering is the moment it becomes possible again. We'll see you in the next one. This is War Heroes.